Good morning, social entrepreneurs. I flew in from New Orleans a couple days ago, and as I was just walking through Christchurch, I was struck by the similarities just in the days after the storm. So just walking around all the urban farms, the creative placemaking, the ingenuity of the people who had come and filled in spaces with things that were for the community, and just hearing Ralph talk about the stories of people who started social enterprises, and just hearing about people's backgrounds. A lot of people, similar to New Orleans, didn't really have backgrounds in social enterprise per se, but started things right after the storm because it was what we had to do. So let's see. So just to put a few of the disasters that we went through in New Orleans into context. So everybody knows about Hurricane Katrina. This happened in 2005. 80% of the city flooded. Over 1 million people were displaced, and a month later, 600,000 people were still displaced. Over 986 lives were lost in that disaster. So we think about Hurricane Katrina, and then 5 years later, we had something else. So many of you also probably know about the Deepwater Horizon BP oil spill. So this was the largest, or considered the largest marine oil spill in the history of the oil industry. And they've predicted that around 22,000 jobs in the commercial fishing industry will be gone by 2020. So definitely lots of economic impacts to that as well. And the other one that we maybe people don't know quite as well is around our issues around coastal land loss. And this is an issue that has just really started to surface. And 5 years ago, we just looked at the maps and the data. Basically, the situation from 5 years ago has the worst case scenario has now become the best case scenario. And in 50 years, it's predicted that we will lose. Currently we lose about a football field of land an hour on our coast. And so what that means is for some of the parishes surrounding New Orleans, Terrebonne Parish, for example, will lose 41% of its landmass in the best case scenario in the next 50 years. So what that means is thousands of people and communities will be underwater. And so you can kind of see this map to see kind of like what's about to happen. A little bit about Propeller, the organization that I run. So we started after Hurricane Katrina, and really in response to the disaster. And we were very inspired by many of the things that happened in Christchurch, with the community coming together, with people taking things into their hands because the government was not moving fast enough. And we had people from teachers, real estate agents, probably occupational therapists who said, I have to do something for my community. And so we had neighbors helping neighbors, starting organizations. Artists were some of the first people to come in right after the storm, putting up street signs. We didn't have street signs in New Orleans for like 3-4 years. And so like you drove around the streets and it was like all the painted street signs by artists up everywhere. We had people gutting houses. We had people starting reuse organizations. And so we really started in response to that energy that we felt right after the storm. And our worry was that, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years after the storm, we were afraid that energy would fizzle out. We were afraid that, after the media attention went away, after the federal money ran out, that it would just kind of fizzle away. And so that's why we started this organization. We're a social entrepreneurship intermediary to really focus on building that energy. So first, what we did was just started lifting up the stories of the everyday heroes who were starting organizations and companies that were making a difference in the community. And then we started with a lot of pitch competitions. And then I quit my job in 2011. I had been working as a teacher. I had done lots of different things to run this organization, Propeller, full-time. We started initially as a volunteer group. And so since 2011, we have incubated over 130 companies, and they have collectively generated over $84 million in revenue and financing. And we run accelerators. That's what we do. We run a water accelerator, education, health, food accelerators. We also do a lot of pitch competitions in these sectors. And one of my favorite pitch competitions that we did right after the storm was really around vacant land. So we partnered up with the city of New Orleans. They gave us 50 vacant lots all across the city to be part of our competition. And we said to the community, whoever has the best idea for this piece of land, whatever land it is, you will win the land and you'll win some money to get your project started. So those were some of the kinds of things that we did right after the storm. let's see. So our current accelerators provide coaching, equity investment, networks, technical assistance, and office space in our 10,000 square foot incubator facility in Central City. So this specific building took on 8 feet of water during right after Katrina. And currently we house over 80 companies, over 150 individuals, and this operates as our for-profit social enterprise. So just a few fun pictures on what it used to look like. Was a rim shop. We changed the garage doors. This is part of the renovation. We had a graffiti art show inside right before we finished the construction, and this is what it looks like now. Yeah, and so, and also when I get back, we're about to launch $1 million social venture fund so we can start investing in our own companies. And we've also launched a few policy initiatives that have resulted in the unbundling of food contracts, to tracking subcontractor invoices for $10.7 billion that's being spent over the next 15 years in coastal restoration. And we've grown quite a bit. We went from one full-time employee, myself, in 2011 to a full team of 30. So at first when we started, it was kind of like throw all ideas at a wall, like whatever it was. And it was great at the time, but then as we grew, as we went from recovery to rebuilding to regeneration, we started realizing that it wasn't enough for kind of one company to be doing this good thing, another company to be doing that good thing, and we really had to think about how do we curate this whole thing, because we needed to really get to collective impact. We were facing big issues as a city, from childhood obesity, the food deserts, and we realized that no one person or company could do it on their own. So we started a new strategy where really about curating and figuring out all the parts of a system that needed to come together to move a problem. So I'll just give you a few examples. Okay, those are 4 sectors. So in food, we worked with school food to increase the amount of healthy food going through our public school system. And at one point, we had 40% of the whole public school food contracts under our control. And with that, we were able to change the procurement piece because we really wanted to make sure local food was part of the school food system. And so once we got that in there, we were able to work with the distributors, local distributors and aggregators in the food system, incubated companies that were doing that work. We were also working with the growers and at the same time working with institutional procurement, kind of like big hospitals, and with the producers themselves. So that's just one example. In health, we had, people always say, well, social enterprise, you can't scale there. So we've had some good kind of for-profit type successes in health. So one company called Ready Responders, they recently raised over $1 million in Silicon Valley from Founders Fund in order to provide, they're piloting their Uber EMT services to increase the response time to ambulance calls and to decrease the cost. That's just one example. I'm running low on time, so I'm not going to go into all the different sectors, but the story that was told at around year 10 was that New Orleans was experiencing this entrepreneurial renaissance. I don't know, you may have heard this in the media. So we've been in Forbes, New York Times, Atlantic, and the story was that New Orleans had become this hotbed for social entrepreneurship, that we were on the rise. So basically the media, the national media, was very bullish on New Orleans. It was all around this entrepreneurial laboratory of innovation. So that was the story. And we had gotten a lot of kind of credibility from national foundations as well for this work. And so at around year 10, we called it Katrina 10, it was our 10th year anniversary, we asked ourselves the question, I'll skip this. Okay, we asked ourselves the question, are we doing better or are we doing worse? And so, a lot of the data was coming out at the time, and really what it showed was that after 10 years after the storm, we were doing worse, And so there was a story of we're doing better, all this rebuilding, all this recovery, and we were doing worse. And so here's some of the kind of the data around that. So before the storm compared to after, the income disparity between whites and blacks has widened considerably with an 18% increase. Okay, and you can kind of read these. And prior to the storm, New Orleans was a very inequitable city already. Pretty much everything across every single system, education, health, food, economic development, criminal justice, all the data showed that it broke down along racial lines, with whites at the top doing much better than African Americans. And that was no different in New Orleans, and I think we thought that, well, we were closing that gap, but really we were not. And so here are just some more statistics about the kinds of disparities that are currently in New Orleans from, on the business side of, there's a statistic about African American owned businesses having only 2% of receipts from the entire economic system, even though African Americans make up 60% of the population. So that kind of thing. And then at that point too, right now in the city, around half of all African American men are unemployed, even though many of them have college degrees. So what we did as an organization is we really clarified that around the racial equity lens, because we realized that, if we're experiencing the same kind of disparity across every single system, there's got to be something wrong with the system. And for us, our analysis was that it was structural racism that was feeding every single thing. And so if we did not tackle structural racism directly, no matter how much time, no matter how many social enterprises you incubated in, like health or food, it was going to come right up, and you were going to see that same outcome in that sector. So I know I'm low on time, so I'll just wrap it up real quick of like a couple things that we did. So we really started using a racial equity lens in everything that we did. We doubled down on our policy and advocacy efforts because, I think someone from yesterday talked about like systems change and how as social entrepreneurs, we really need to start stepping more into that field because, we can work so hard and run these businesses, but if we're not actually changing the system, the outcomes that we're looking for are not going to change. So that's one piece. And the second piece someone also talked about was about institutions, and institutional organizing has got to be something that we also take on. And I think that we need to build our own institutions with our own values, but we also need to infiltrate the current institutions because there are people in these institutions that could be our allies, and we need to really be strategic about how do we get hospital CEOs, philanthropy, the people who actually hold power. We need to be able to get in those systems and get some people into onto our on our side. One of the things that we did most recently is we started hosting these race and equity 2-day workshops, and we would get old line, wealthy New Orleans family, philanthropy folks, the hospital CEOs to come and sit through this and see, just to get educated on what actually is the problem, because we can't, in our city, we can't currently even agree on what is the problem. So I'll just wrap up there. There's a lot more that our city and things that we're doing. Maybe just one more thing is, in terms of the in terms of the post-disaster context, one thing for cities who have recently gone through some kind of disaster and are in the recovery process, that it's really, really important that you are measuring, that you have equity indicators. Do not wait 10 years for the data to come out to show that things are actually worse. And it's really, I think it is really important that you have some kind of objective entity that is crunching that data for you. So I'll end there.
So, thank you, Andrea. Frustratingly, the sand has run very quickly through the hourglass. We could sit here for an hour and discuss these issues. There are really gnarly questions in here, fascinating questions. We've already had a warm-up hour at the bar a couple of nights ago. Can I invite any of you to engage with these most compelling stories and interesting people? Hunt them down at the break. Just very quickly, there's a few themes that come through to me. I'm really interested in the theme of honouring the past, continuing the narrative in these situations and carrying that on through. I'm really interested in the idea that Raf introduced of there's an opportunity to open up space in cities before there's these shocks, and I get that and I agree. It seems to me that maybe you need a shock to really open that space up, or perhaps you need, alternatively, very strong leadership. And I'm thinking of, I don't know, New York City and the greening of it and so on. Strong leadership and government at that end can do it, but one way or another you need a force to pull us off from a centre of gravity, I suspect. I'm really struck by the common strand of the common themes of back to basics in these situations. Where's our shelter? Where's the water? Where's our food? Where's our community and our support networks around us? And it seems to me that in these circumstances we always go back there, and having our head around the responses in that situation are really important. I think there's a really interesting dark question in here I'm curious about. It's a shame we didn't get a chance to dig into it, but how much are the community responders in these situations just convenient fillers in time? We pick up the pieces, we help rebuild communities, and then I think of Raf's example of the Pallet Pavilion, a real icon in the city, a statement about a community response, and then it gets removed because the financial capital comes back and it develops that space for a financial return, and what happens is these community responses get pushed aside as we go back to business, as it were. And I do get a sense of a feel of a real tug of war here between attention that I've seen in this city. There's a real want to go back to familiarity. Let's build the past, let's build it fast, I just want it the way it was, I want all this drama to stop. And I think there's that other block of us that are really interested in what's the opportunity to use this to accelerate us into the future, whether that's electric vehicles and you get a sense of a tug of war that's ever present in these conversations. Andrea, to you particularly, thank you for naming. There are hard questions here. They're not easy. They require real commitment. And I think above all, they require naming and owning, and then an intentionality. So that's us. Thank you so much. Have a great day.